Hello and welcome to Mr. Barton's Web Whizz video number 11, where once again I take you on a very quick tour through some of my favourite mathematical websites. Now, I came across this week's website when I was having a look on the TES Secondary Maths forum and a user happened to mention it, and since I came across it I've been using it ever since. And it sprung up at the end of 2010 and it's brought to you by the ever reliable Google. And it's called, and I'm not 100% sure how you say this, it's the Google, and it's Ngram or Ngram, I'm going to stick with Ngram Viewer. And there it is there, Google Ngram Viewer. Now, let me just explain what's going on here. Basically, on Google Books, there are around about 5.2 million books containing 500 billion words over the last 200 years. And they are books in Chinese, English, French, German, Russian, and Spanish. And what this viewer does is you can type in a word and it will search for the frequency of that word, how many times it occurs in books over the last 200 years. And it throws up some really interesting results. So the one that's defaulted here on the home page is the Atlantis versus El Dorado, and there's the relative frequencies, and we can see when they start taking over each other. But let me throw in some of my favourites that I've discovered. So here's a good one, garlic versus onion. So the relative frequency of those two words in books over the last 200 years. Let's have a look at this. Give it a click. Takes a second. So you can see here that onion is leading the way from about 1860 onwards, but then look at garlic come back into its own from about 1990 as people perhaps get a little bit trendy for French foods and all that kind of stuff. Another little one that's good is the relative frequency of the different types of media. So if I go for radio versus television versus the internet, let's have a look what that shows up. And remember, this is the amount of times that they're referenced in books. So not a lot going on for the first 200 years, but then look at radio, a massive increase at the end of the 1930s through the early 1940s, and that's probably the influence of World War II there. Television starts really coming into its own and has a general increase. And look at internet, only really kicks in the late 1990s. Here's one that you perhaps wouldn't want to use in your classroom, but it's interesting nonetheless, and that's the reference of various drugs. So if I go for cocaine, I go for heroin, and I go for marijuana, a bit of a tricky one to spell that, and give that a search. What's going on here? Well, again, not a lot going on in the before 1880, but then look at this, cocaine, pretty popular there, but then look at the rise from the 1980s onwards and compared to the trend of the other two drugs. Now, again, for use in a classroom, maybe you can use it as just kind of a little bit of fun, and there's nothing wrong with that, and getting kids to suggest things. They can search out the relative frequencies of their names. One I did at a conference the other day was my name, Craig, versus Ben, one of the conference delegates, and I wasn't happy about this because, as you will see, Craig's not all that popular. I'm looking good around about the late 1800s, but Ben, pretty popular all the way through, but some interesting dips. So you can get kids to shout out things like that, and even if it's just getting them interested in numbers and graphs and stuff, then I'm all for that. But then again, with things like the media, you've that example I showed before with the radio, you've got a bit of a cross-curricular link there, suggesting historical reasons for the trends in these numbers. And it's kind of like Gapminder and the Guardian data blog in that sense, that it's about making sense out of data and relating it to the real world. There's lots of classic examples that have been found by people. If you go to the website Ngram's Tumblr, if you just Google Ngram's Tumblr, then what you've got here is people submitting some of their favourite examples. So you've got book versus data there, street battles, street protests and street musicians. That's quite a nice one. This is one of my favourites here. Is this all the different words? Needn't, oughtn't, mightn't, daren't and mayn't. They're all the different uses of those. The press versus the media, there's a good one. And you can do different phrases like "win the future," and that was very popular in the early 40s, and then dwindled from there. Slave versus servant, and so on. So it's a really nice website to have a play around with. As I say, it's good for a quick 5-minute use at the end of a lesson. Might also be a good idea to give students as a little homework for them to come out with the most interesting comparison that they can find and write a little report on it. But hopefully you like that. If you've come up with some good ones, or you've used this website in an interesting way, please hop on to Tez and on the Whizz video page, just share your thoughts at the bottom, and I'll be back with a fresh video next week. Bye for now.